Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy.
Hi. You were saying you just had a dance party?
Yeah, I just had a little dance moment in my office.
Party may make people think I'm saying multiple people. Just a dance party.
Yeah, no, just me. Yeah. I'm not the kind of person to dance in front of other people usually.
You like to dance like no one's watching?
I like to dance like no one's watching, literally. I need at least a few drinks or like the vibe has to be just like really exceptional for me to dance with other people or around other people.
Because you were listening to Harry Styles, so that must be a vibe for you. But then you also mentioned funk music because you said Mello had just, your wife, in case people don't know who we're talking about, had just watched a documentary about funk music.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. You're talking about dancing. It was not funk music that got you moving, but apparently there's some study that shows that funk music gets the body moving whether you want it to or not.
Yeah. But what's interesting is like, so when we think about funk music, there's a very specific like aesthetic or visual that we have. Right.
I mean, if I think funk music, I feel like you think George Clinton, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe other people think of something else because I'm not that familiar.
Yeah.
But I think for those Family Stone, maybe. But I feel like the least familiar are going to think like George Funk kind of, George Clinton kind of stuff. Like he to me is like the face of funk.
Yeah, absolutely. Those two bands and musicians are definitely famous for basically creating that funk sound and really just like honing in on it. But this specific funk still shows up today, right? And this is interesting because I actually took a music history class in one of my graduate programs, and we traced the history of American music all the way back to Negro spirituals on the plantation, which is a whole other thing that we can talk about. But part of that history, that etymology of American music today, funk is a part of that. And as American music has evolved, these little bits of all of these like older sounds are still embedded in the culture today. So like the Harry Styles song that I was listening to, we wouldn't really call it funk, but there are funk elements in it. And so when you get into like the technicalities of like music and sound and things like that. But yeah, apparently on the documentary, they were talking about how there's something about funk music, like the rhythm, the bass, the way the drum hits in funk music, like that deep reverberation, when your ear hears it, the way it stimulates the part of your brain that's connected to movement is why when people hear that like funky sound, like there's something instinctual. It feels like instinct for them to move to it. And it was interesting to me because like being on this journey of like understanding somatic movement as part of like the process of healing and like attuning to your body and like growing as a person, that just made so much sense to me about how good music that really makes you want to dance, like there's a release of dopamine and endorphins in that can be part of like a healing process or a healing moment for people.
Is the documentary A History of Funk Music and Black Liberation of the 1970s from PBS? Does that sound?
I think so.
Because it just came out on PBS YouTube a day ago, so that might be it. It's like an hour.
Yeah, I think that was it.
I'll link to that in the show notes, so anyone who's interested can watch it because it sounds pretty interesting. And I haven't watched it yet, but it does sound interesting. And I think, anytime people talk about music and like the legacy of music and the heritage of music, like you just can't talk about modern music without talking about the Black influence on music. You can't talk about music without talking about the Black influence on music, because everything has, whether it's the spiritual side of music, the funk, all of it, white musicians have always borrowed, which feels like a really generous word, from Black culture and Black music, but Black music has almost always been leading the way. And it's not popularized until white musicians, let's be more honest, steal from that culture or appropriate that culture and bring it into what is considered the mainstream. Because when we look at pop charts and, you know, whatever charts we're looking at, when you look at like the Billboard or any of those top 100, it goes to so much of the things we've talked about, which is it's centering whiteness, right? So the mainstream quote unquote charts are the charts that are dominated more by often white artists and are being listened to, which is the most important thing, by white artists. And other charts, like what, you know, what music Black people are listening to predominantly, is considered urban chart, or, you know, there's separate charts that aren't the main chart. And it's the same with music categories, right? Anything that isn't consumed by a more mostly white audience is othered, right? And so it only becomes quote unquote popular or quote unquote mainstream once white audiences say, yes, we like approve of this, we like this. It's the same with books, it's the same with all parts of like culture, right? But it doesn't mean that those artists, I think what often happens then is people who don't have enough understanding, who are white, they don't know about it until it reaches their ears, the places where they're listening. So they think that the people they're hearing it from are the people who've originated it, without understanding it's been that same type of music, whatever form it is, has been going on for often years or decades on other charts by other artists, usually artists of color. So it's just very, like, I think all of that stuff is just so interesting, because I saw somebody say the only white music is classical music. And I would imagine that that's also not true. Like, probably, and if it is true, it is only because of access. Right.
Well, I think so. This is something, you know, that I learned in my history of American music class in grad school, and also something that I talk about when I do workshop facilitation for Black History Month. Like, Black people invented American music in this country. Like, before there was such a thing as American music, the music that people in this country were listening to was European music, which was strings, right? Pianos, violins, wind instruments, things like that. And it wasn't until the slave trade where the banjo, which is based off of an African instrument, an East African instrument, that there was some rhythm introduced to the music, right? Then the drum, right, which is also has its roots in native cultures, whether African or indigenous. And it also brings to mind like the whole concept of minstrel shows, right? Like the original minstrel, right, was a white man who was a performer who was going around. He heard a Black man who was formerly enslaved singing his blues music, and he decided to dress up in blackface and imitate that sound and that performance. And it took off with his audience. That's where we get the term minstrel. That's where blackface comes from. And so again, that cultural appropriation of the Black experience, of Black creativity. And so when we think about American music and how far it has come, we really have to give credit to Black people, right? And to some of the indigenous folks, right? To the indigenous folks in this country. Like, there would be no American music without Black people and indigenous people.
There would be no America without Black people.
That too. That
right?
too.
But yeah, exactly. And I extend everything, I think food, you know, just every part of our lives. And yet that's not the lens that we are often shown, right? And it says a lot about how any narrative can be rewritten and told in a myriad of ways depending on who's telling the story, right?
Yeah.
And how the story's told. And that speaks to a lot of what's going on right now with education and what stories are being told and how and by whom and rewritten in what ways. But before we go too far, I wanted to say two things that you made me think of as on the minstrel show thing. And that's minstral, because it sounds like minstrel in a way.
Minstrel,
like
min, not men.
Right. Anyway, James by Percival Everett, which was a huge book last year and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Well, you know, and well deservedly so. I just can't recommend it enough because it speaks to so much of this about like whose stories are being told and how, and the narrative we see them and the white lens on so many things. And that book, because it's basically Huckleberry Finn, written by Mark Twain, obviously, rewritten through the eyes of Big Jim, who was the enslaved man in the book who, you know, fought for his freedom. And it's just so interesting because it speaks to minstrel shows. Those come up in that. but instead of the white lens on that experience, it's this black lens on that experience. And it's just interesting to see a story that is so well known and by many people well beloved. And I'm here in Missouri, where Mark Twain was from, or Samuel Clemens was from, who is Mark Twain. You know, Hannibal, which is like the center of so many of the stories, is so close to where I live, and I've been there many times. And so it's interesting. It was so interesting to me to see, to say, like, have that experience of a well-known story when it is told through a different character's lens, someone who has marginalized identities in that story, and their story on the exact same thing, and how it reshapes what you think about that experience, right? An experience you think you know well after having read Huckleberry Finn. Many kids read that book and their experience, and like reading it in this. And I really, really hope, this may be a hope that's far-fetched given the current climate, but how beautiful it would be if seventh, eighth graders, I think that's often when kids are reading Huckleberry Finn, if they were reading both of these books together.
Yeah.
English teachers who would take that time to do that and talk about these things, like, what are we not getting in our storytelling? What difference does it make on whose lens we're seeing a story through, on what we actually understand about the experience? What does it do when we have more lenses on the same story, and how does that enhance and enrich what we understand about an experience? Because all of this that we're talking about, it's like, if you only see the white lens on music, then you would think, I think there are many people who would have no understanding of the music they listen to now and how it's been influenced and how it originated with Black people. And I would say one way that's a really good example of this, and I want to turn it back to you on this, is Beyoncé and Cowboy Carter. Because you talked about banjo, and I have a personal deep, deep, deep love for banjo and fiddle and bluegrass music, because my grandpa was a very, very good banjo player and fiddler. And he and his friends used to get around and play bluegrass music when I was a little kid. And it is just like the soundtrack of my youth. And I still love bluegrass music so much. Anybody who has any real understanding of bluegrass music knows that music is deeply, deeply rooted in the Black experience in America. And bluegrass is, modern country music is born out of bluegrass.
Right.
And yet, how has country become country
so
music,
whitewashed?
Right. Become this space that white people think that they created, that they owned, and that they can now gatekeep and say, no, Beyonce, you're not allowed in this space.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When anyone has any knowledge knows it is a space she absolutely, like, just historically and through the roots, should be in, right?
Yeah.
It is her. And to see her so snubbed in so many ways, and now just like this backlash as she goes out to tour that particular album, it's just so interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, Black people, yes, invented American music, definitely invented country music. Like Sister Rosetta Tharpe comes to mind, which was a huge influence on Elvis, right? And other performers, that were her contemporaries and that came after her. And I think with Beyonce, I think there's a lot happening there. There's obviously the gender component, there's the racial component, there's like the artistic, creative, musical component. And so many people, especially so many men, right, don't like women who feel haughty to them, right? Don't like women who are too successful because it feels like haughtiness to them, because it somehow threatens their own success, which doesn't make any sense, because no, that's not the case. But a Black woman, especially taking up space in a genre that we could say historically has been really white, but if you look at the whole of history, it hasn't, right? Like, when people say historically, they're talking about a very specific point in history, right? And so, right, 1950s, 1960s, etc. And so not only is she, culturally a country girl, like Louisiana, Texas, she talks about that, she sings about it, but there's no ownership on creativity, and I think when I say, and when people like me and like you say things like, we have to talk about how Black people invented American music, we have to talk about how Black people created country music, we're not saying that whites are not allowed to participate in that, right? Like, we're not saying everything that white people have done to contribute to this artistry doesn't matter. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is, like, there's a conversation to be had here, right? The fact that so much of country music is coming from white artists, in terms of like pop culture and what's, what most of us see, that has to be in conversation with the reality and the fact that that is a style of music that Black people are responsible for, right? And so when you talked about James and Huckleberry Finn, right, like those are two separate works of art by two separate authors who had completely different experiences growing up, writing the book, etc. But those books are in conversation with each other. And when we're not expansive enough to see that, to understand that, and allow ourselves to receive that conversation, then we're having a one-sided conversation, right? We're not really getting the context, the whole wholeness and totality of the experience that we could get. And what's funny is when, we were talking about this concept of just like how possessive people get about their artistry and things like that. It made me think, like I saw this TikTok months ago, maybe it was on Instagram. I don't remember. It was somewhere on social media, but it was a Black artist or illustrator, I think, who was talking about how basically she was saying that like why most white people are up in arms about AI taking away like creativity, like it's because it's their first time experiencing cultural appropriation. And I hadn't ever thought about it that way, but I was like, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that's not to say that
So
obviously AI is stealing ideas from all kinds of cultures and races and experiences, but that this is something that like cultural appropriation is now becoming real. Cultural appropriation is becoming real, right?
Yeah,
For white
it's the
people
same
through
thing.
this context.
It's like what we talked about with the Pink Pussy Hats and that kind of a thing, where white women, their first sort of, when you have your first experience of rights feeling like they're being taken away with Dobbs and Roe and all of that, I feel like it's that same thing where it's like, this has been a thing. It's just your first time being a part of the conversation and of experiencing it. And so it feels like that same thing. That's very interesting with AI. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I guess it kind of does feel like that. First of all, I just wanted to say for anyone who doesn't know, misogynoir is what you were talking about, where it's like, it's not just because she's a woman or just because she's Black. It's that when we talk about that intersection of those two things, the unique experience, the Black women experience of oppression is that idea of misogynoir. It's where racism and misogyny meet, where I can experience misogyny, but I can't experience racism. And so it's that unique experience. And so I think it's just something for people who don't know to read more about. But it also makes me think, like, why is it that Beyonce is not allowed to contain multitudes? Like, because I think part of what this white country audience is saying is like, no, you're in that category. We've decided you're this category of music. And this is our music, and you're not allowed to be here. And if you're trying to be here, it's only because you're wanting whatever attention or trying to get our money or whatever, which again, I think it is that same thing of like white people feeling like, wait a minute, this was our space and now you're trying to steal it. This appropriation, which is funny because you can't appropriate something that was already appropriated from you. But I wonder, it's like, why is Taylor Swift then in their mind allowed to contain multitudes? She's allowed to be on the pop charts and still they will receive her, love her, claim
as
her.
A country artist, a country girl. Yeah. Post Malone, who's now going country for some reason.
Exactly. White man. So there's like this double standard that's so obvious of like, white folks are allowed to contain the multitudes. We're allowed to be on any charts we want, but we've decided you're, as a Black person, not allowed to be on the charts that we say you can't be on. Right. And it's just, and Beyonce's not the only person. Another person that I've learned a lot about this from is Rhiannon Giddens. So if anyone doesn't know her, she's an amazing bluegrass artist with this band called Carolina Chocolate Drops. I love her. I love her. I love her. I really recommend people listen to her and just see some of the things she's talked about of her experiences too, as a Black woman who is like accused of all of these same things that Beyonce's going through. She's been going through this in all of her career and being like, excuse me, this is the music of my family, like my people, my family, my roots, my history. This is the music I know. I'm not new to this. You're accusing me of like coming to this thing that you've done, but this is music that's always been in my life. So I just think that's interesting. And, the last thing I wanted to talk about that I thought we could maybe talk a little bit too is cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. So I have heard people in music, especially, it's one of these areas where it just seems to really like come out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I've heard people say things, and we've seen it in the dreads conversation too, dreadlocks and things like that. But with music, where people will say like, "Oh, I'm not culturally appropriating. Like, I'm not allowed to just appreciate." People like Justin Timberlake, who's been accused of this, going back even further, Vanilla Ice, right? Like all of these white artists that are bringing in sounds from cultures that were not their own or that had been playing in that space first, right? And they're accused of cultural appropriation, and they will say, well, no, it's just cultural appreciation, and lacking this understanding of what the difference is. And I'm so excited to hear your take. But my take on it is what matters is understanding and acknowledgement of legacy. So I think if you're appreciating music, it means I appreciate the legacy of this music. I know the legacy of this music. I understand where this has come from. I've done my research, really dug in and said, I know country goes back to, like, I understand the roots of this. I've listened to the roots of this. I've taken this in. I'm acknowledging the roots that I'm pulling from. I'm not new to it. I'm not just dabbling in this. I'm not just doing it because it's cool. It's because I know it. Like, certain people I think do that and others don't. And I think that's the difference. To me, appropriation is just, I'm taking this thing on, I'm wearing it as like a mask, or I'm using it where it suits me, but I don't really have any understanding of the legacy that was used in getting to this place.
Yeah.
Does that align with what you think, or is there more?
I agree. I would say that's definitely a distinction between appropriation and appreciation. I also think like it might look a little different depending on the context, right? Like, because I could see someone arguing and saying, well, I'm going to wear a sombrero for Halloween, and I'm going to credit or dreads or whatever. And I'm going to say, oh yeah, no, this is part of that culture, but it's still cultural appropriation because it's still perpetuating a stereotype that is harmful to a specific community of people. And so I think the difference for me is like, yes, understanding the history and the legacy and giving attribution wherever and whenever you can, as many times as possible, so people don't fucking forget, but also understanding that with that appreciation of a specific cultural thing that you are, trying to get into or whatever, understanding that there are ways in which the experience of the people who have to live with that every day experience harm because of other people's perceptions. And so as you go out into the world trying to embody these perceptions, you have the privilege of not experiencing that harm, right? Because that is a cultural mask that you can take on and off at will. Whereas the people who that is their lived reality do not have that same privilege. Like, they cannot take their skin color off. They cannot take their hair texture off, right? Like, they can't change that. Like, it's something that is inherent to their experience. And so being mindful of the ways that you choose to embody that appreciation has to be a really, really big component of it, right? And even if, and this is the thing, right? Because I think sometimes people will say, well, my intentions are in the right place. I'm not trying to cause harm. My heart is pure. Like, okay, there's still impact in what you do. This is a conversation about impact versus intention. I saw this on Instagram some years ago, and it's like, if I drop an egg on the floor, right? And I think this conversation is especially relevant today with the price of eggs. Like, if I drop a dozen eggs on the floor, bringing in groceries from the car, right, that my wife and I just spent $10 on when eggs used to be fucking $3 a dozen. My intention wasn't to throw $10 away. Obviously, like, I'm not a lunatic. I'm not trying to like just be wasteful and be, careless or whatever, but the harm is still done. The impact is still there. And so when it comes to things like cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation, when it comes to things like trying to just make sure that you're a fucking decent human being who isn't perpetuating any kind of stereotypes or myths or assumptions about a people group or a person, that you take responsibility for your impact. Your intentions don't fucking matter, because the world that we live in, like, people don't know your intentions, right? Like, not everyone's going to stop and think, well, I wonder what their intentions were when they said that or when they did that,
but
right?
even if you do know their intentions, Like, I can know that you don't mean to harm me, right? I can know that, and it can still feel bad.
Yeah.
It can still harm me, right? Like, even if
Yeah.
I know you didn't mean to, you know, if you whatever, I don't even want to get into a hypothetical, but like, just if you did something where I would always assume positive intent with you, we have a relationship where I can have that, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't still do something
right
that would hurt. And then
Yeah.
I would then expect you to at some point acknowledge and repair
and take responsibility.
because we have a
Yeah.
relationship where I would hope you would want to repair if I was harmed, even if you didn't mean to, and even if I knew you didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brings to mind a lot of the people who say that they love their LGBTQ plus family members, love their Hispanic or Latin spouses or
My black best
sister-in-laws
friend.
or brothers-in-law or best friend or neighbor, and still voted for Trump.
Right.
Like, you cannot say that your intentions matter more than your impact in that situation. Like, you just can't. Like, it's all over the fucking social media where like people are getting disappeared by ICE because their spouse voted for Trump. And when people are confronted with that reality and it's like, oh, I never thought this would happen to us. I thought we would be okay. Like, and people ask them, well, do you regret voting for Trump? No.
Or
They
even the ones
dig their fucking heels in.
And some, though, do even regret it. And this, I think, is where this, like, the messiness gets in of, okay, and then what? And if we're going back to music and cultural appreciation or appropriation, it is like that moment when someone like a Justin Timberlake, and I'm only using him because he has been the center of a lot of this conversation a lot of times around appropriation versus appreciation.
Because he's a fuckboy. I mean, let's be honest. But anyway.
He owes his career from NSYNC to where he's at now. He owes that to the music of Black folks who came before him. There's just no arguing that. He has been clearly deeply influenced by the music of folks who are Black. And I do believe he has had, I don't know him. Fuck if I know him, but he seems to me, from everything I've seen, I do feel like he's probably genuinely never had any intention to make anyone feel bad, to harm anyone in the Black community, that he's only, taken that as influence because he cares and he loves the music. And like, I truly believe, like, again, assuming positive intent, I believe his intentions have always been good. The problem becomes then, what if you still harm people, right? What if that his showing up in this way and people feeling like, hey, you've not done enough to honor those folks from whom you are heavily borrowing, stealing, influenced by. We don't feel that you've done enough to repay that community through financial ways, in acknowledgement in other ways. And when he has received that criticism, my impression anyway has been that he has sort of been like, I'm sorry, like, yeah, I hear you.
That's not what I meant.
But I don't know what else you want from me. That's sort of the feeling I get from him, is kind of
defensiveness.
That people will say, well, yeah, I'm sorry. And they throw their hands up in the air and it's like, well, I said I was sorry and it wasn't good enough. Now what? Right. And I see that a lot from the Trump voters as well, of like, yeah, I fucked up. Okay, I see it. Sorry. Now what do you want from me? And that's where I think, because the people who double down, the people who are just going to be like, they're so dug in, they don't give a shit. Like, you can't reach them. Right. I wish we could. I hope someday we can, but we can't.
They're committed to the cognitive dissonance that they live
there's
in.
People in the country world that those are just those people and they are who they are. I'm trying to think of those people who I think of are more like the Justin Timberlakes, who I believe really do feel like they meant no harm. They didn't want to cause harm. And they even maybe feel a little bad that they do feel bad they've caused harm. But they're left in this place of like, and what do you want from me now? Like, I've done it. I've tried. You feel like this, I just can't win with you people, right? Like, I've heard people who've said that kind of thing. To those people, it is like, it's not just about a one-time, oops, sorry, my bad, and moving on, because that isn't what harm repair looks like. We've all felt it when you've had an argument with somebody who's wronged you. Like, again, going back to you and I, if you caused me harm and I know you didn't mean to, and I told you, Taina, that hurt me. If you said to me, my bad, sorry, and then just moved on, and I was still sitting like, oh, I'm not fully healed here from this yet. Like, you're still, and then you started to turn on me and be like, God, Becky, like, you're never, like, it's never enough.
We just talked about this.
Yeah, we're done. I've moved on. Come on. Can't we all move on? But everyone I think has had that experience inside relationships with people.
Yeah.
And you know what that feels like. And it's like, no, we're not done. I need to hear from you why it was wrong.
Yeah.
I
You need
to
to understand. Yeah.
I need to know why it was wrong. I need to know how you're going to handle it differently in the future. Right? That is what harm repair looks like for us to be able to move forward. And I feel like that's what's been lacking in some people in this cultural appropriation conversation or appreciation conversation is it's not enough to just say like, yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. My bad. Won't do it again. I need to hear that you understand why it was wrong. And I don't feel like I hear that enough from a lot of folks. And most importantly, what are you going to do now? What's going to change then? Now that you know that this does cause harm to some communities, what changes for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's such a lazy way to try to do harm repair, whether it's like in a relationship, whether that's a romantic or platonic relationship or with a community. Because what it's doing is like, it's when someone is in that state of mind, in that defensive mode, they're just like, okay, well then just tell me what to do. Like, and it's like, it's not my job to like micromanage how you interact with me and how you interact with this community. You need to like work on yourself and understand what went wrong here and then take accountability for it. Like saying sorry is not an apology. Like an apology includes accountability. Saying sorry is just saying sorry. Like that doesn't mean anything. It does not mean anything. And when that becomes
stuff them in your pocket, because
you can stuff them in your sack, buddy. You know, like
they don't help me.
What's her face from Seinfeld? But I think when there's a pattern of that kind of a behavior, at that point it becomes gaslighting. It becomes manipulative, right? Like if it happens once or twice, like I'm not saying every time it happens it's gaslighting and it's abuse, but if it's a pattern of behavior that a person is unwilling to change, that is a red flag that person is okay with being in a toxic relationship with you, whether it's at the individual level or at the communal level, right? And so I think most white people, well, I won't say most white people, I would say some white people.
You can say most white people. I don't even know what you're about to say, and I bet you can say most white people.
They're not used to doing the work. They're not used to doing the work.
And
right?
I would say all white people. Until you learn it, you're not used to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not the way we are conditioned.
Yeah. And that is not a moral judgment. No. That is just a fact. As a Black woman in this world, I have had to learn how to not just navigate my own feelings and experiences, but also how to navigate the feelings and experiences of men in my life. How to navigate the feelings and experiences of white people in my life, how to navigate the feelings and experiences of thin people in my life, how to navigate the feelings and experiences of able-bodied people in my life, right? That's the mental and emotional load that people that come from historically marginalized communities have to face every day. How to navigate the feelings and experiences of straight people in my life, right? And so when I'm around other people, I am always gauging how much of myself can be here without putting myself into a harmful situation. And that is not something that a lot of people with social, economic, able-bodied, straight, hetero privilege have to navigate. And at the top of that list is white men, right? Like able-bodied, straight, white men are at the top of that list because everything comes easy to them. They don't have to, they live in a world that has been set up for them to succeed.
It centers them.
Yes, yes.
But when I hear that, and it's not just white men, like I'm fine with an all men statement, and we've gotten comments on YouTube. So for all of you who are like, isn't that just the same as saying all women? It's not. So
it's not the same.
Go on
because the experiences are fucking different. It's not the same.
But I have no problem
being a fucking idiot.
Exactly. But I will say that it's the more privileged identities you hold, the more that the world centers you and the easier it is for you to exist. Does that mean life is easy for you? No. And that is hard for people to understand that nuance and hear it. And that is where it can be really hard to have these conversations with people who have more privilege. As somebody who has the most privilege in this space, I can say, like, I also know what that's like, and I remember the defensiveness I used to have to that, because I would, back before I began to do any of my own work, it was like, how dare you say I'm privileged? How dare you? I mean, it was never that bad, but it was hard. It would be hard to hear that because I would think, but wait a minute, I grew up to a single mom who didn't have a lot of money. You know, like I grew up with I know that I have some neuroatypical issues that are there, right? Like whatever, all the things that there are, you know, not having size privilege and things. And yet the world still is ultimately made easier by the fact that I have this skin color that grants me a great deal of privilege in this culture. And in the same way, you can't take away your skin color and move about the world in a different way. I can't take mine off and move in a different way either. I can't know what it's like to navigate the world in a different color body, right? It just doesn't possible. And so how dare I tell people who are navigating the world in a different body that they're wrong when they tell me it's more difficult? Because I can experience the fact that I know what it's like to navigate the world as a woman, and I know that it's more difficult than navigating the world as a man. But when you hold the most privileges, it's hard to hear because you think, but I do have things that are hard, and no one believes it's not hard. Well, we all have hard. It's just how many layers of hard are you having to navigate every day? Right? And that's where that masking, I love that you brought that up because I think some people don't understand that, like what it means to have to mask. But the more privilege you have, the less you understand what masking looks like. But it is like you have to everyone with any marginalized identity has to wear a mask, at least in some settings. Right? For their own safety, to get through, to be okay, to stay regulated. And the more of those identities you have, the more spaces that you're having to wear masks, or the more masks you're having to wear on top of each other. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's draining. And that is something that you don't have to do that. You don't understand the toll that takes.
Yeah. It's self-denial, right? At its core, it's a type of self-denial. And it's not the kind of self-denial that people talk about when they're just like, well, I just want to go on a binge shopping spree. Like, that's not self-denial. Like, you know, like I just want to waste all my money on like shit on TikTok. That's a healthy kind of self-denial, right? Because like that's the conversation about how to be responsible with something. But the kind of self-denial that this is, it's like intrinsic to your core. And it's when you don't feel like there's a part of you that is safe to be in that space. And so, I mean, there have been times where, you know, my wife and I have traveled abroad where we're just like, we're moving through this space, and this is a very like religious country in some ways, or there are countries we won't go to because we just don't know how safe we will be, right? There's too much ambiguity there. And so spaces, even here in the States, when we're out, that we're just like, we do a lot of road trips, right? Because we travel a lot to see family here on the East Coast. And so as we're driving through certain parts of the country, we're just like, okay, let's make sure we get gas and food before we go through that part of the state, so we don't have to stop unless it's an emergency, right? Let's make sure if we do have to stop that we stop for the least amount of time, right? It's funny because I don't love to stop at Buc-ee's, but my wife loves it because it's like a carnival to her. Her ADHD, like she just loves it. She's just like overstimulated, which is why I don't love it, because it's overstimulating. But we used to, you know, try to stop at Buc-ee's when we were doing our road trips down to the South. But after November 2024, we're just like, I don't think we should stop there anymore. Like, it just doesn't feel the same. It never felt completely safe, but it definitely doesn't feel safe at all now, because I feel like people are emboldened to wear their hatred proudly, you know, whereas before there was a little bit of a public shame about it, you know? And so you might get looks, you might get stares, like you might get ignored, but now it's like, it feels like it's like way out in the open.
They're saying the quiet part out loud now. Where it was always there, but it used to be in hushed tones, and now it's feeling emboldened.
Now it's like, girl. You brought up like the people who may have like voted for Trump and are now regretting their decision. And I've seen this conversation kind of happening in the past few weeks, you know, where people are sharing stories about like family members who are now regretting their decision, taking down their Trump paraphernalia, you know, and finally realizing what an idiotic move that was. And there's a part of me that's like, okay, and
well, that's where
it feels like the sorry.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to get at. And I feel like I went way off, but exactly. It's like, it is fine to have made a mistake. It can be hard for me to find empathy because part of me is like, how the fuck did you not know? But okay, let's again assume positive intent. They didn't really believe it was going to cause harm. They didn't want to cause harm. And yet here we are. Your vote has caused harm. Saying I'm sorry, I regret it, I wish I hadn't done it is step one. But the problem I have is the people who throw up their hands.
Let's backtrack. It's step 0.
Okay, yeah, step 0. My problem is the people who then throw up their hands and think like, well, why isn't that good enough for you? I've said sorry. What else do you want from me? And what I now need is for you to not just say, yeah, oops, I shouldn't have done it, but I want you to acknowledge why. Why shouldn't you have done it? Not just because it cost you now in your stock, your 401k. I need to know that you understand why that vote was harmful and not just harmful to you. Harmful to your bottom line. I need to hear you understand why it was harmful to humanity and explain it. Because otherwise you haven't learned. So
you haven't learned anything.
Yeah, and your sorry means nothing.
And we're gonna end up in the same exact fucking situation the next time another fucking fascist comes along.
Yes. Right. You'll vote for someone else who just will do a better job with the stock market, but you'll still be okay with deportations of citizens who don't agree with them. Like, so I need to understand that you actually are listening and learning and acknowledging why it was harmful beyond just how it impacted you and how it's impacting others. That's step 1. So step 0, fine, is sorry. Step 1 is I need to hear that you understand the why so that you've actually listened and learned. And then step 2 becomes, and then what? What are you going to do different now? And that doesn't mean just I'll vote different in the next election. That's not enough. What are you actually doing? What continued learning are you going to do? What groups are you going to be inside of to help them with their efforts to make change now, right? Where are you going to put yourself into spaces that actually reduce your privilege and reduce your comfort to show that you get it, right? How are you using your money if you have any privilege there to make a difference now? How are you using your voice to make a difference now? How are you supporting communities that you've actively harmed now? That's what it looks like to do true harm repair, not just I'm sorry and why isn't that good enough?
Yeah.
Trump voters listen.
Yeah, and I think the problem or what feels like the problem to me right now is that a lot of people who are in this place of now regretting their decision because it's directly impacting them are not in the mindset of doing harm repair. They're just in the mindset of like, how do we change this as quickly as possible so it no longer harms me? And it's like that's not progress.
And those are the people for whom I have no problem saying FAFO. Fuck around, find out. Sorry, guy.
Yeah. Like that's not progress on your part. Like you haven't really learned anything. You're still incredibly selfish. You're still operating with this sense of toxic individualism. And, there was just the hands-off protests that were happening all around the country and in some other countries as well.
I was there.
And which I'm glad for, but then a lot of the like the man on the street type of interviews that I've seen on like social media, it's all like my retirement plan, my groceries. And it's like, it's still all about you though.
I saw that on social media too, where people were like, oh, they're calling it a particular thing. And I can't remember now, but talking about how elderly people or a lot of older people are like leading this movement now, this sort of like rebellion against Trump.
Because their Social Security and therefore
Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, 401k, all of that. Right. And so now that it's directly harming them, they're sort of leading this charge. And I can't remember what they're calling, but it's like this don't fuck around with grandma kind of a vibe. And like, I see people posting about it on social media that are like excited about it. And there is this part of me that gets it. Okay. We need people on board because we can't make change if we don't have enough people making change. And these are people who tend to vote, and that is good. But the part that makes me mad is I'm like, and where were they when I was out there marching and when I didn't see these people at the protest after Dobbs. I didn't see these people at the Black Lives Matter protest. These people weren't there. Now they're there because it matters to them. And while I appreciate that they're there, it's sort of meaningless to me if it's only because if they're not also saying, hey, I also care about reproductive freedom and I understand why that matters. Hey, I also care about Black lives and brown lives and what's happening with ICE and, trans lives and like all these other things. If you don't care about those things, it's hard for me to be like, hey, I'm going to get on this whole like angry granny. Like I should be thrilled that she's participating thing. Like, no, because what the fuck? It doesn't matter because then you're okay. Then we go back to like, they want this return to the status quo that was okay to them.
Yes.
But it still wasn't okay. It was
Yeah.
still harmful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's
That said, I was out there protesting and it did feel good. I just will say, like, it did feel good.
I'm glad that it's happening. I just think that's where a lot of people will just stop. And it's like, that's the beginning of the journey. We're not saying that doesn't matter. Like, please hear us if you are listening, you were there. It's one piece of the puzzle. And I think what gets people in trouble with this a lot, and by trouble, I mean just like fucking ignorant, is that they consider all of these issues silos.
Right.
And everything is connected to each other. There's a giant Venn diagram of all the issues that people are having in this country, and it's all connected in some way. And when you are just, well, I don't care about deportations or, reproductive justice or any of that. I just want to make sure that eggs don't keep going up and my retirement is secure. Like, that shit is all connected. Like, you don't realize that it's connected. The last thing I will say about this, because we're close to the end here, is like, I saw a TikTok of this girl. I think she's in college, because she was talking about her professor. And she was saying, that during the voting season, a lot of like people were talking about how people were just perplexed at how so many people could vote against their own interests. And her professor was like, well, what do we mean when we say their own interest? Because it's in the interest of people to be racist, right? To benefit from racist systems and institutions. It's in the interest of people to benefit from the control of women's bodies. It's in the interest of people to benefit from mass deportations, and to have a fucked up immigration system here in this country. And so when you say they're voting against their own interests, you really have to do the work of figuring out what is the interest to these people, right? They're okay with inflation, which we are hurling towards right now because of these tariffs.
Yeah.
Another recession that we will have to live through because of these tariffs. As long as they don't have to watch Black Lives Matter protests in the street, as long as they don't have to think about how many women need abortions, as long as they don't have to think about trans people needing gender affirming care, as long as they don't have to think about the people moving into their neighborhood who don't look like that and being able to afford housing.
As long as they get to protect their place on the hierarchy.
Yes.
As long as they don't have to lose whatever power they have, which is why, again, like when we look at the voting numbers, people say, well, why would white women vote for Trump? But it's because they know that they still get to protect that, like they have all this privilege, and that vote allows them to keep that privilege where they are on that hierarchy.
Yeah.
Why did Black men vote for him? Because they're still
identifying as men, not as Black men.
And there's privilege inside of that. And again, that goes back to why, again and again, you hear this refrain of listen to Black women. And it is because of that unique positionality that we talked about, with misogynoir and like where these overlapping identities are, and why 92% of Black women continue to show up and vote, even though it's not actually in their best interest to vote for a Democrat.
Yeah, it's not.
Right? Your best interest would be to vote for a socialist or some the working people's party or whatever. But you show up and vote for a Democrat because
those are the options.
And you understand these overlapping identities, and that gives you the best potential to change these systems. And here we are with people voting against their best interests. But I wanted to ask you one quick question. When you talk about the Venn diagram, what is the thing that when you think about what's at that center of that overlapping Venn diagram of all of these individual silos of interest, what is the thing that's at the center for you?
That's a good question.
And I know it's not an easy one. I'm putting you on the spot. I wonder if there's a word that comes to you. For me, it feels like that word is humanity. Right. And I don't know if there's a better word for it, but like the respect and belief in, and maybe it's autonomy, but like this belief in the, each person being a valuable human who deserves dignity and care and space in the world. And at the center of each of those things, ultimately, I think that like where all of it overlaps, it comes back to that. And that's why I think if you can't get to that core issue, then fuck off. But I don't know if there's a better word in your mind or something that would, core is something for people.
I mean, there's a part of me that's like, it needs to be like one specific word, but I think
it may not be.
I don't think there is. I think the way you just explained it is actually quite beautiful, because it is about understanding the inherent dignity of every human being. And when you're able to see that, you're able to see that it doesn't matter if their experiences are different from you or if they choose to live a life that's different from yours, right? As long as it's not causing harm to people, right? Then that's a different conversation. Every human being is inherently worthy of a life of thriving, not just surviving, right? I shouldn't have to choose between having a cup of coffee with a friend and like paying my bills. You know what I mean? I shouldn't have to choose between living in one neighborhood where it's affordable for me, but the county or the government or the local, whatever, has completely neglected that community, versus going into major financial ruin to live somewhere else where it feels like there's more supportive structures for my home and my family. Like, these are things that we shouldn't have to grapple with every day, and yet we are forced to grapple with every day. I shouldn't have to worry about my friends who were brought here when they were children and now live in fear every day of being disappeared by ICE. And they shouldn't have to worry about that either, right? Like, they're contributing members of society, they're paying taxes, like, they're not causing harm. So what is the big fucking deal? And I saw this white boy on TikTok, and I call him a boy. He's probably not a boy, he's a man, but he looks very young. He's definitely younger than me. So he's this kid, and he does these TikTok lives where he like will invite people to disagree with him and then just basically school them. And he asked this question of this one guy who was for deportations, and he was like, what's the reason why mass deportations instead of mass assimilations, right? Instead of like, mass asylum. And the guy was like, well, it's so expensive. It's so expensive to let people come into this country, whatever. And the guy was like, it actually costs more to deport people. And we lose money in the long run in the economy because we have less people contributing to the economy.
Kind of, it was like jailing versus actually
right,
like
versus education. Yeah. It costs more to jail someone than to fucking educate them. But, we don't want to think about that because we just want to get rid of the things that feel like a nuisance to us in this country. It's this fucking toxic individualism that I'm so fucking tired of.
Well, maybe that's the thing at the center of that Venn diagram is collectivism, because ultimately all of that makes me think about the famous, I don't know if it's a poem or essay or speech or whatever, from Martin Niemöller from Germany, where it was like, first they came for the socialists and I didn't say anything because I'm not a socialist. And then they came for the whoever. And then they came for the Jews and I didn't say anything. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me, right? Because I didn't speak up. What was the other people? And it's like, maybe my kid doesn't need free lunches for now. And that's great. But just because it doesn't directly affect my family doesn't mean I shouldn't fight for it. Because if I don't fight for that, then what happens when they do start to come for something that matters to me, right? Yeah. And if we wait until the thing that matters for me, there may not be enough people left to help us be in the fight. Yeah. And we're learning that right now in a really hard way that people have learned throughout history. And that's why it's so important for people to understand those overlapping Venn diagrams, because that overlapping is what intersectionality is about. If you've never understood, that's what it is.
That's what it is.
Our individual interests and oppressions and privileges and all of it, it all overlaps because no one lives in a silo. No one is one thing. Yeah. We all contain multitudes, and we all need to be allowed to express and to show that we contain multitudes. Yeah. Going back to the beginning with Beyoncé, because if we don't allow for that in others, then it won't be allowed for ourselves. And by the time it comes around to you who holds the most privilege, there'll be no one left fighting for you if you aren't fighting for them. Yeah. And that is why I say, fuck the CMA, the Country Music Awards, for not giving Beyonce any awards or any nominations, and why I'm so glad she won the Grammy. Because do I give a shit really about music or anything? No, but I know it's important to talk about these issues because they all matter. They all overlap. And if I'm not fighting for all of everyone, for all the ways that this shit is these country guys showing up and deciding that they own that space, do I really care? I don't really like country music. I don't really care. I love bluegrass. I don't love country. but I still need to be using my voice where I can to say, hey, bullshit, to call bullshit where it's bullshit, so that when they do come for what matters to me, there's people left to say, hey, I'm here to fight for you now because you fought for me. And also, by the way, I shouldn't do it because of the reciprocal arrangement. I should do it because it's the right thing to do.
But start with the reciprocity, right? Like Audre Lorde said, Audre Lorde said, we don't live single issue lives. Nobody lives a fucking single issue life.
This idea of single issue voters is nonsense.
Yeah. One last question. So we talked about the people who voted for the clown in DC who are now regretting their decision because it is personally affecting them. I mean, we went into that a lot, but like if you had to just really quickly articulate for those people, what do they do now? What advice would you have for them as a white person?
Close your mouth and open your ears. Start listening. Audit whose information are you taking in? I can't believe you're here, but if you are here, then good.
We haven't turned you off yet.
It's a first step because you need to open your ears and open your heart and shut your mouth. We are so conditioned as white people to always talk and to always be leading the charge, talking, setting the tone, setting the room, owning the information, everything. That we aren't conditioned to listen and learn. Truly listen and learn, especially from people who are different from us. So find a place to start, and don't start with that book from that white woman. Start with books from people who have the lived experience. Go read. I personally say start with Bell Hooks because I find her work to be the most accessible. I think Audre Lorde can be more challenging for people who are like at that beginning sort of stage of saying, I want to learn and open my eyes and ears to what others have to say. But find educators who have the lived experience that you don't have and listen. Learn, drop the defenses. It's so hard. And also find communities of other people who are doing the same work that are similar to you. So white people need to have spaces with other white people where they can talk about how challenging it is to be confronted with this new understanding, because it's hard. I'm not going to lie. Like, it's hard. Because I remember the feeling of like, what else do you want from me? Right? Mm-hmm. You got to have a space where you can have that conversation in a place
and
where
be challenged,
where it's acceptable to have that conversation. It's not appropriate to have that conversation. And like you said earlier, you shouldn't have to tell me how to make amends when I fucked up. Go to other white people to learn how to make amends. Go to other white people to vent and to learn and to have people to listen, because sometimes you do just need to vent, and I get it. But make sure you have spaces for that are appropriate. And the listening and learning needs to be from voices that are not like yours. But don't shut yourself off. You're a human. We can grow and evolve. You don't have to always be right. It is okay to listen and learn and grow.
Yeah. I agree. I think people are uncomfortable with discomfort.
Very much. Especially white people.
Yeah. But that discomfort is just a sign that your growth edges are expanding. And if you cannot live in that space of expansiveness, you will never be able to see beyond your own point of view. You will never grow as a human being. You will stay stuck where you are, dare I say, in your miserable little life, because it is a miserable existence to not live.
It's a small existence.
It's a very small existence to not live in that expansive mindset where it's okay to be wrong.
This goes back to some of what we talked about here and privately too, about scarcity and abundance mindset, which is so often just gets associated with money and like bullshit money mindset stuff and like manifestation. Not that I don't believe in those things, but not in the ways they're often shown in the white community.
Yeah.
But white folks, especially, I think all people living inside of capitalism, we are deeply, deeply conditioned to have a scarcity mindset. It is what allows capitalism to go unchecked in the way it is. And so it is so understandable. Okay. Like, if we need to find compassion for ourselves, it's so understandable that we need to be right, that we have to shut ourselves down, that we can't take in new, because all of that, like, growth is about abundance. You don't have growth and scarcity. Scarcity is about less, right? It's about receiving, it's about being smaller. It is not about challenging and learning and pushing yourself and growing and all of that. That is born out of abundance mindset. And so it can feel very, very challenging when you are deeply conditioned into a scarcity mindset to start to show up in this new way. So you've got, like, we have to give ourselves a lot of like love in it too, and saying like, it's not my fault that this is hard. It's not my fault that this is challenging. It is not a moral judgment, like you said earlier, until you make the choice
Yes.
to say, I'm now choosing not to participate. Now I can judge you morally because you've now made an active, aware, conscious choice to say, nope, it was too hard. I don't want to do it. Now that's a reflection of your morals. But when you didn't know better, you don't do better. And I can't judge you for that. It's not a moral decision. It's conditioning. But as soon as I know, you know, and if you've listened to this, now you know, now it becomes a moral judgment. What is your morals? Where do you want your moral compass to take you? Towards growth or to continue to stay where you've been in your comfort zone?
Yeah. To stay small.
Small. Yeah, it's small. I don't want to cast any kind of other judgment on it to say like it's bad or whatever, but it is small because I can tell you your world expands when you start to allow yourself to be wrong, to welcome in voices from people who have a different experience from you. And then when you start to get the privilege of getting to share space with people who have a different experience than you will begin to learn how small your world had been. I have seen that. My world was so much smaller than it is today.
Yeah, there's no joy in that. Like joy comes out of a sense of abundance, I think. And when you live so small, there's no real joy there.
Yeah. This was such a long one. And we didn't
I know.
Sure,
I'm sorry, y'all.
I know. We were like, maybe we'll talk about AI. Maybe we'll talk about this. But I love that a conversation that starts with you dancing to Harry Styles leads to something that feels so really needed right now.
Yeah.
And so thank you, as always. Thank you for having these conversations with me.
Yeah.
It really filled me up. And we've started to hear from some people about like, it's fun to be out hearing from people saying like, I really love what you guys are talking about. I really love the conversations you're having. Like, I really love your show. And that really feels good. I don't know about for you, but it makes me feel really.
It does make me feel good. I get like little messages here and there. Sometimes it's from a friend who's like, damn it, your podcast made me cry again. And it's like, I'm sorry, but it's so good. But yeah, no, this has been a really good space. I'm thankful for it. And I'm thankful for you.
I'm thankful for you and for anyone listening. And if you are listening, help us combat some of the YouTube bullshit troll comments and give us some nice comments just so that they can see those too, please. And also for us to see them. Mostly for me, because I'm the one who's mostly looking at those. And I don't, duck off water off a duck's back, not duck off water off a duck's back. But still, it would be nice every once in a while. We do get some nice ones, but give us some.
Yeah, no, especially if you are a white listener who has our same values and you see people being shitty to us. That's your opportunity to like, put your money where your mouth is, to like live out your values and just kind of check it.
That's what that harm repair piece looks like too. Okay. So now I know that my existence can sometimes cause harm. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person for that, right? But just like by nature of having this privilege, that can cause harm. So what can harm repair look like? It looks like showing up to use that privilege. People often hear, what does using my privilege look like? That's one way. When I see
shield other people.
Yeah, when someone else is acting like a fool, for me to be the one to step in so that someone like Taina doesn't have to. Now, granted, I can do that because I'm the person with the privilege and space, but you can also help me in that. So yeah, love it, love it, love it. Okay, this was so long. Bye, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Next time.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time. And if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast. But truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.